Hello, 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 and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Jameelah, and I am a master manifestor, and I'm sure you are too, because you are tuned into content like this. The name of this channel, my channel, our channel, is Holistic Manifesting, because I believe in a whole body, whole being, and whole person experience when it comes to manifesting these amazing lives that we're choosing to manifest, right? What I'm talking about today is having hope when you feel defeated, right? So I guess this is a message of encouragement to some degree because I understand really, really deeply the implications of not having something that you really want and not knowing how to get to it, right? That's just kind of where defeatedness comes in, right? We often focus on getting to the finish line and then like the final output when it comes to anything that we're creating, right? I just sat in a meeting with a person that I collaborate on a lot of projects with, and she wanted to show some of the pre-work that was happening before we actually start designing and creating and developing or creating video or whatever we do to it, right? And it was such a reminder that we have to stop where we are when it comes to process and progress and look around and say, where am I at today? Where was I at a year ago? Where was I at 2 years ago, right? We have to look at that process and think like this is a long way forward, right? So each day when you're working on something, there has to be a moment that comes in where you're just like, this task is done, but you have to stop and say, yeah. And so last week I didn't have 5 of these tasks done. This week 5 are done, right? I may not have the final outcome, but I am mostly there, right? Another thing is, I have notes here, so I just want to stay on track. It also seems like in those times, we might struggle primarily with self-doubt, right? I think self-doubt is the number one thing that people struggle with when it comes to manifesting the lives they choose, or either just finding contentment in the life that you have, right? Early on in my spiritual journey, this was a primary topic I used to have all the time. Like me and my brother used to do a lot of personal development work together. We did a lot of videos. We did a YouTube show before anybody was even on YouTube. And so, that was always my person to bounce these things off of. But something that we tackled and discussed a lot back in the day was self-doubt, because that's the thing that holds people up the most, right? It's not believing that that thing that you truly want can happen for you. And so the symptoms, like the symptoms of a person who thinks like that is, you'll see that they don't lie upon anything that's bigger than themselves, right? They just decided, this is an atheist mindset mentality, which is fine, right? I can understand agnosticism more than I can understand atheism, because I'm just like, well, the not knowing is the fact to me. Atheism is trying to, take it to a knowing that's just not there. And so, the agnostic mindset is something that I like. But what you'll notice in people who believe that self-doubt is not a part of the process, or it is a part of the process, what you'll notice is that the symptoms of that is, I got off track, but I'm going to make sure, I'm going to get this point out. The symptoms of that is trying to do everything for yourself, trying to force it, push it, move it, pull it. And if you've ever worked on anything for any length of time, you know that the major success part of it, it doesn't come from that action. It doesn't come from that. We can set ourselves all the way up to the most perfect position possible, but that's all it is it's a position. And that position helps us when the opportunities show up, right? But we can't just make certain things happen. We can't just bring them into our space unless we're actively taking these steps and we're actively, constantly defeating and pushing back the self-defeated aspects of who we are, right? And then so I think self-doubt is like one of the first spiritual attacks that people receive on their journey, because self-doubt is on the inside, right? And because everything begins and ends internally for us, right? Everything begins and ends internally for us. That will make the most sense for any negative entities to try to get in is through the beginning, right? It's like, let me start with their mindset. Let me start with them not having hope and not believing in themselves. Let me start there, right? And so even young, we get caught up in this space, and the people around us are suffering from it. And everybody knows that self doubt is a huge aspect of what they're dealing with. But instead, you might often be in environments where people start making excuses that are external, that really speak to their level of self doubt, right? Some term I've been hearing way too much, but it's a good term, and I probably say it wrong. It's not a term, it's a statement. It's only hit dogs holler. And so like when you people are running around making excuses about why something couldn't happen, or why they couldn't work on this, or why they don't have this, or whatever, it's generally based in their self-doubt, and they don't want to acknowledge or believe that they don't believe in themselves. They rather believe that some external force is somehow holding them back or keeping what they want away from them. There are external forces out there, and I'll get to that in a second. But these external forces are not stronger than the creator himself, right? They're not stronger than the powers that be. So while someone may try to sabotage something, and I've had people do that, I sat in a job interview once with somebody around, and they didn't want me to apparently take this job, but it was very, very clear in their actions, and they pretty much sabotaged my entire interview. They made noise in the background, they opened closed doors, they turned water on in the kitchen. It was just insane. And it was an adult, and so it's kind of hard to believe that adults act like that. But it's just this thing that we have to keep in mind, that self-doubt is a disease. And if we don't acknowledge that we have it in ourselves, it will turn into this plague that starts interfering negatively in all of our relationships, right? Because you'll find that people with the most self-doubt, they're always doubting what everybody else can do. They're always doubting the possibility of anything being done. They're always doubting any success. So their own self-doubt plays out into that. Their conversations are usually based on, well, they tried that, but they have the wrong plan. They're not going to work it out, and it's not going to be, I work with someone right now who does that every single project that's mentioned. It's, or how that's not going to work. They're not going to be able to. I was like, shut up. Shut up. It's like, dude, stop talking, you sit in this meeting and you just like, the purpose of us being here is for the possibility. And I feel the same way about our lives, right? The purpose for us being in this life is about the possibility. It's not about shrinking. It's not about holding yourself back. It's not about living small. It's not about living beneath our egos, right? Because a lot of times we get caught up in that. It's like, you ever been around people who want you to live beneath their ego? Like, when you do this thing, it makes me feel less good about myself. So therefore, don't do this thing. But this thing that you're doing is a positive thing for you. And it has nothing to do with a negative impact on them, but they're choosing to make it a negative impact. And so you're sitting there in this space. It's just like, we're not supposed to be this contracted. We're not supposed to be this tight. We're not supposed to be living in self-doubt. We're not supposed to be in a hopeless, contracted nature. We're supposed to be expanding and evolving. Everything else in the universe, everything else in this world, from the grass on the ground to the blue skies up there that's being reflected by the ocean, everything is constantly moving and changing and growing and expanding and evolving and ascending. We are no different from that. We are definitely a part of this environment. I think the biggest trick that we've got fallen into is believing that because we have this mind here, that somehow we're bigger than what's happening all around us in nature and in the innate versions and organic versions of our society. And we're just not, right? And we try to be the antithesis. My daughter hates that word because she's like, it's so hard to say, just say antithesis. But it's a different word when you use it differently, right? We try to be this in our environment, but we're always going against the grain. There are natural ways that things work out. And even if we do it 100 different ways or try to, it doesn't mean that there's not a with ease, ebb and flow way of doing things, right? And being small and contracted is not one of them. And you can't function around people who want that from you. You have to get away. There's no other way to do it. You have to. There's no other way to do that. And then with self-doubt, when it keeps returning back into our lives, we start to believe that it must be true. because it's a recurring theme. But if you know anything about the human mind, it pretty much runs the same script about, 30, I think it was between 15 and 10 items over and over again in your head all day. That's what it does. It just runs those 10 items, and it's just like this, and your brain bumps around and you think that it's new information, but it's really not. Until we insert new information or a new experience or a new interaction, our brain is going to keep going on that loop. And if that loop includes some level of self-doubt or some level of negative self-talk, then it's going to be like repetition brings on, belief. It's going to be a solid belief in your mindset because your brain is going to keep on bringing that up. So we wonder why people who are into like personal development and stuff, they listen to the same messages over and over again. They understand the power of repetition because they know that if that message is pounded at me over and over again, then I'm going to start to believe it. The same reason why I don't watch news, the same reason why I haven't had cable in like 15 years. Like I've lost interest in that. Right after I got divorced, I was like, bill I don't need. And then when I could afford it, I didn't want it. And so we have like Netflix and Amazon Prime and like, Disney Plus, whatever they watch, And I find that to be way more exciting because a TV is just not running in my house ever. You're intentionally watching, and we've been like that. And so when you get into these spaces and you start to understand what repetition does, like the news station or negative information, or there's a new YouTuber that I found, but she's telling some facts, right? But she's very negative. I just told my daughter that there was an anger that was coming up in me because of the way that she's approaching the topic. Now, mind you, she's getting her point across, but the level of the negativity in it, I was having trouble with that over days. And it's an issue in my life that she talks about. That's something that's very ripe. So when I'm sitting there listening, I'm just like, girl, stop listening to this stuff. And I literally took it off and unsubscribed. And there's nothing wrong with her. She's doing her job. She's doing what she does. Everybody's in a different phase of their development. But my point was that I felt the change in my system and who I was over a week of listening to that content nonstop. Because I was like, wow, this is true. This is true. This is true. But I'm a sociologist. Just because it's true, it doesn't mean I need to beat myself upside the head with it all day. I'm just not going to do that, right? And so we just have to keep in mind that it doesn't mean that it's more true, and that when the enemy, I'll say enemy like this because it could be spiritual attacks. It can be people are used around you to attack you. It's just what it is. But it's all about you. When the enemy is not able to affect you negatively from the inside, that's where it starts at self-doubt. And if you let go of that self-doubt, that's on your spiritual journey when you'll start to see the external forces coming hard against you, right? So like when the internal is not working, there's like enemy is like, this chick is too strong. Let me start fooling with her environment, right? Let me start doing things to her physical environment. And that's what you'll notice, right? So people will approach you crazy. They'll make crazy ultimatums to you. They'll tell you things that you know are not true about yourself. They'll try to talk down to you. They'll try to manipulate other people to believe a certain thing about you. They'll try to run to everybody and tell everybody that you were so awful and this person is this. You'll see those external things happening. And so that's what you listen to when a lot of people in spiritual awakening environments start talking. They say, you have to pay attention. Don't start there. It doesn't start there. It doesn't start externally. If you are full of self-doubt, people are not threatened by you in any kind of way. So they don't bother you. That energy is not threatened. The spirit of self-doubt is not threatened. The spirit of hopelessness is not threatened because you already have it. So they're like, we're good over there. They already doubt themselves. Who's believing in themselves? Let me go over there, right? And so we think like, oh, this environment, these people, they're for me. Everybody's for me. Yeah. And then a lot of people experience where they start to believe in themselves because they really feel positive and they're like, I can do this. I can do this thing. I'm capable. I can be successful in this. Then the people around you or the environments will start to challenge you because that's how it works. It's internal, then it goes to external. And those external forces can be even more trying to people who have not truly done the inner work. So if you try to skip over that self-doubt part and not really addressing those issues inside of you, and you made some manual adjustment to your life that like you removed a person, you went to a new job, you did these manual things, that theme that you haven't conquered is going to pop up again, right? And so the external stuff is what people really yell and scream about, but it's the smallest piece of the puzzle. If people could only understand that. The external aspect of manifesting is the smallest piece of your puzzle. The internal part, have you ever seen that graphic that shows the iceberg with the little piece top at the top and then the huge, massive piece of ice at the bottom? That huge, massive piece of ice, that's your internal, spiritual, inner work part. That little piece that everybody sees on top, that's just the outcome. That little person at work that's bothering you, that's just that little, the family member who, holding a grudge with you, that's just a little, the people that's closing these doors in your face until they open for you, because they will open, right? That's just the little part, right? The internal part is where the work happens, right? And when you start ignoring these outside circumstances, because you're like, this is really not giving me you will be challenged one more great time with a theme, because in your life, it's going to keep on going. But if there's a theme you've been working on, like say your theme was like self-doubt, or, it's valuing yourself, you'll be challenged one more grand time. And in that challenge, it's almost akin to the universe saying, you know better. You understand better. You are no longer filled with the level of self-doubt that you came into this space with. Can you make a good decision that shows your level of self-value? That's the clincher. That's the part. That's the part of self-doubt that we get to when we say, I could have gone the other way and I didn't. I believed in myself. I took the next step. I took the leap. Hope. That's where it comes from, right? And it's in another thing of self-doubt too, it tricks us hardcore into focusing on other people, focusing on fighting with people, focusing on arguing with people, focusing on proving points, focusing on being jealous, focusing on competing with people. Self-doubt is a disease. It's a negative impact. It's the scrounge of the earth. Self-doubt is that thing that's ruling all the negative relationships that everybody's talking about. Because think about this. If someone truly believes in themselves, if someone is truly living an ascended and evolving and a fully evolved life as opposed to a contracted life, are they really walking around trying to stir trouble for other people? Are they really walking around trying to minimize others? Are they really walking around gossiping about others? Are they really walking around trying to talk down other people's work and contributions, or trying to minimize other people's contributions to their lives? They don't do that. Only people filled with self-doubt or some type of self-disgust or some type of self-hate or something in there can have the time and energy to walk around and spew out these things. I think the most innocent version of it, if there is an innocent version of that, is going to be self-doubt. Because when people are in self-doubt, they don't really know that they're doing that. They just know that they don't believe. They don't believe it for themselves. They don't believe it for you. And you just happen to be there, right? But if we go bleeding all this stuff out everywhere we go, we create these negative environments. So this is just about having hope when you're feeling defeated. Just know that feeling of being defeated, it's not real. It's not real. It's not remotely real. It's not real. It's just in your mind. It's just from the messages. What you have to do is feed yourself new messages so you can clearly see who you are and what you're made of.